Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive all about intermittent fasting. It feels like everywhere you turn these days, someone's talking about it, and for good reason, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's more and more research coming out about the amazing benefits.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about all of that today, but like with any popular health topic, there's also a lot of hype and, some confusing information out there.
Yeah, for sure. It's super important to cut through all that noise and, really understand the science behind it.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to do today. So first things first, let's just define exactly what ICE is, intermittent fasting.
So basically, it's not about what you eat, but when you eat.
Yeah.
It's about timing your meals to create these cycles of eating and then voluntary fasting. So you're basically giving your digestive system like a break.
Okay, so it's not like deprivation or starvation. It's more about just being strategic about those eating windows.
Exactly.
Okay, I can get behind that. So what happens in our bodies then when we shift into that fasted state?
So when we eat, our blood sugar and insulin levels rise, right? And so our bodies are like focusing on digesting and storing nutrients. But when we fast, those levels drop, and that triggers all these fascinating metabolic shifts. Like Dr. Sachin Panda,
Yeah.
his lab is like a leading authority in this field,
Yeah.
and his research shows that these shifts can have huge effects on our health.
Okay, so tell me about these effects. This is what everyone wants to know. What are these amazing benefits that we keep hearing about?
Well, one of the most well-known benefits is weight loss.
Okay.
By extending that time period where your blood glucose and insulin are low, your body has to tap into those fat stores for energy. And that leads to, a reduction in body fat,
Yeah.
especially the visceral fat that's around our organs.
Okay, that's good. But what about muscle loss? I've heard some concerns about that with fasting.
Yeah, that's a good question. Your body's actually really smart about preserving muscle mass, even during like extended fasts.
Okay.
It prioritizes burning fat for fuel. And there are also certain hormones that protect your muscle tissue, like glucagon.
Okay, that's reassuring. What about our organs? Are there any specific benefits for like our liver or our heart?
Absolutely. Um, Intermittent fasting can be really good for your liver.
Okay.
Think about it. Your liver works so hard processing everything you eat. So fasting gives it a break, right? And that allows it to focus on things like detoxification and repair.
So it's like a little vacation for the liver.
Pretty much. And research shows that time-restricted eating, which is a form of intermittent fasting, can actually help prevent and even reverse fatty liver disease.
Wow, that's huge.
Mhm.
Okay, so we've got fat burning, liver health. What else is going on like at the cellular level when we fast?
Well, fasting triggers this process called autophagy.
Mhm.
And basically, your cells start cleaning house, getting rid of all the damaged components and, recycling them for energy.
So it's like spring cleaning for our cells. I like that. So are we talking like anti-aging benefits here?
Potentially, yeah. There's growing evidence that activating these cellular repair pathways can actually slow down the aging process. And there are two pathways in particular that are really important, AMPK and sirtuins.
Okay, I always get a little lost with those sciencey terms. Can you explain what those two things actually do in like simple terms?
Imagine your cells are like these tiny little factories, right?
Okay.
AMPK and sirtuins are like the efficiency managers. They make sure everything's running smoothly, fixing breakdowns, optimizing energy production.
Okay, so fasting gives those managers a chance to work their magic.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that analogy. But it can't all be like sunshine and roses, right? I mean, are there any downsides or things we need to be careful about with intermittent fasting?
Right. It's important to remember that it's not for everyone.
Okay.
There are individual factors that can influence how your body responds.
Right, like what?
Well, for one, genetics play a role.
So some people might just naturally benefit more from fasting than others.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, what about hormones? I've heard that fasting can mess with hormones, especially for women.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Okay.
Fasting can influence our sex hormones, so it's especially crucial for women to pay attention to their hormone health.
What are some of the concerns there?
Some studies have shown that like prolonged or very restrictive fasting could negatively impact hormone production in women. But there's also research that shows time-restricted feeding can actually be really good for hormone balance, like in athletes, for example.
So it kind of depends on the type and duration of the fast.
Exactly. And, it's always best to work with a healthcare professional who understands, your individual needs and your health history.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've got genetics, hormones. Are there any other individual factors to consider?
Lifestyle's a big one.
Okay.
Your work schedule, how much you exercise, your social life can all play a role in how sustainable and beneficial fasting is for you.
Right, because if it's making you miserable or like disrupting your life, it's probably not going to be a good long-term solution.
Exactly. It should enhance your life, not make it more difficult.
Okay, I like that. So let's say someone's considered all these factors and they're ready to give intermittent fasting a try. What are some of the questions that people often have when they're just getting started?
Well, one of the first things people want to know is, when is the ideal eating window?
Okay.
And to answer that, we have to talk about this concept called glucose clearing.
Glucose clearing, what is
Yeah.
that?
It's basically the transition between a fed state where your blood sugar and insulin levels are high after you eat, and then that fasted state where those levels have dropped.
Okay.
And it takes time for that to happen fully, right? And that transition is really key for getting those benefits of fasting.
So it's not just about stopping eating, it's about giving our bodies enough time to shift into that fasting mode.
Right. And that's why it's so important to align your fasting period with your sleep. Because we're naturally fasting when we sleep, right? So if you extend that fast into the morning or start it earlier in the evening, you get more of those benefits.
That makes sense. Okay, so then how long should that fasting window be ideally?
Research shows that an 8-hour eating window is a good starting point.
8 hours. Okay.
That gives you a good balance. Now, if you do a shorter window, like 4 to 6 hours, you might end up overeating during that time, and that can counteract the benefits.
Okay.
And if you go longer, like 24 hours or more, you might run into some downsides or, diminishing returns.
Okay, interesting. So what about coffee? Like, can I have my morning coffee during a fast? Does that break a fast?
This is a question I get all the time. And surprisingly, black coffee or unsweetened tea will not break your fast.
Wait, really? So I can have my coffee and still reap the benefits?
Exactly. It's not about avoiding calories completely. It's about keeping your body in that metabolic state of fasting.
Okay, that's good news.
However, caffeine can dehydrate you, so make sure you're staying hydrated and watching your electrolytes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so much great information. Any final words of wisdom before we move on?
Start gradually.
Yeah.
Don't go from eating all day long to a 16-hour fast overnight.
Okay.
Just slowly reduce your eating window over a few days or weeks. Give your body time to adjust.
Yeah, slow and steady wins the race, right?
Exactly. And listen to your body. Pay attention to those hunger cues. And if you need to adjust your schedule, just do it. It should feel good, not stressful.
Great advice. I love that. Okay, so we've covered like the basics of intermittent fasting, but let's say our listener is convinced and they're ready to give it a try. What are some practical tips for making it a success? Like, I'm sure a lot of people worry about feeling hungry during a fast.
Yeah, that's a big one. People think they're going to be like ravenous, but there are actually some really simple ways to manage those hunger pangs.
Oh, okay. Tell me everything.
One thing that's super helpful is electrolytes, especially if you're having coffee during your fast.
Electrolytes.
Yeah.
Like those sports drinks. Do I need to stock up on Gatorade?
No, not at all. It can be as simple as adding a pinch of sea salt to your water.
Wait, salt helps with hunger. That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
I know it's weird, but electrolytes are really important for fluid balance and nerve function. And when you fast, especially with the caffeine, your electrolyte levels can drop. And that can actually make you feel more tired and hungry.
Oh, so it's not even real hunger, it's just an electrolyte imbalance.
Often, yeah. So replenishing those electrolytes can make a huge difference.
Wow. Okay, I'm going to try that. What about when it's time to actually break a fast? Any tips for doing that the right way?
Yeah, the key is to not overwhelm your system, Don't break your fast with like a huge plate of pasta or a sugary smoothie.
So no donuts to celebrate the end of my fast.
Maybe not the best idea. Think about it. Your body's been in this state of repair and detoxification.
Okay.
So breaking your fast with a meal that's gentle on your digestion is really important. I always recommend starting with bone broth.
Okay, bone broth. Got it.
It's super nourishing and easy to digest, and the collagen in it is great for gut health. And then from there, just build your meal around protein, healthy fats, and complex carbs.
So basically just whole, unprocessed foods.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What about that whole, like, what breaks a fast thing? There's so much conflicting information out there. Like, what can I actually have during a fasting window?
Yeah, it's confusing, and the truth is it really depends on you. How long your fast is, your metabolism, even your sensitivity to different things. It's not as simple as calories in, calories out.
Okay, so it's more about, like, the metabolic state of our body.
Exactly. Some things can disrupt that fasted state even if they're low in calories.
Okay, like what What are some of the common things that people might not realize can break a fast?
You'd be surprised, but even a tiny amount of sugar can do it. Even just 1 gram of sugar after dinner can mess with your circadian rhythms.
Wow, I had no idea that sugar was so powerful.
It is, and it doesn't mean you have to, be afraid of sugar. It's just about being aware of how it can impact your fasting goals. What about artificial sweeteners? They don't have sugar, so are those okay?
Yeah, are those okay during a fast?
It's kind of a gray area.
Okay.
Research is mixed, but some studies suggest that they might trigger an insulin response even though they don't have sugar.
So probably best to avoid them just to be safe.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new to fasting, just stick with water, black coffee, unsweetened tea.
Okay, good advice. What about like lemon or lime in my water?
Those are fine. Actually, lemon and lime juice can actually help lower blood sugar.
Really?
Yeah, because of the acidity. It can slow down the digestion of carbs and help prevent those blood sugar spikes.
Interesting. So a little squeeze of citrus can actually make my fast even more effective.
Yeah, pretty much. Plus, it tastes good,
Oh,
right?
okay. I like that. So we've talked about electrolytes, breaking a fast. What about exercise? I've heard different things about whether it's better to work out fasted or after eating. What do you think?
That's a great question. And the answer is it depends. Both have their benefits. It really comes down to what your goals are and what feels best for you.
Okay, so what are the pros and cons of each? Like what happens if I work out before I break my fast?
Well, working out in a fasted state can definitely enhance fat burning because when your body doesn't have readily available glucose from food, it has to tap into those fat stores for fuel.
So it's like turning up the fat burning engine.
Exactly. And some studies show that this can actually lead to greater fat loss over time.
But what about performance, right?
Yeah, does it make you feel weaker or anything?
It can for some people,
Ah.
especially if you're new to fasting or if you're doing like super intense workouts, you might feel a little bit less energy at first.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But a lot of people find that their body adapts and they can still perform really well fasted. It really just depends.
So you kind of have to experiment and see what works for you.
Exactly. And if your main goal is to like build muscle or maximize performance, you might want to eat a meal a couple of hours before you work out. Okay, so what are the advantages of working out after you've eaten?
Well, when you've fueled your body with food, you've got more glucose available to power your muscles.
Right.
So you might be able to lift heavier weights or run faster.
Okay, so if I'm doing strength training or like training for a marathon, it's probably better to have a meal beforehand.
Yeah, probably. But again, the best way to know for sure is to just try both and see how you feel.
Okay, so it's all about personalization. I like that. Now, I know we've been focusing on all the positives of intermittent fasting, but are there any situations where it might not be a good idea or could even be harmful?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And the answer is yes, there are definitely some people who should avoid intermittent fasting, like anyone with a history of eating disorders, for example.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Mental health always comes first.
Absolutely. And anyone with any underlying health conditions, especially anything related to blood sugar or hormones.
So like diabetes or thyroid issue.
Exactly. You should definitely talk to your doctor first to make sure it's safe.
Okay, what about pregnant or breastfeeding women?
Generally not recommended. Their bodies have different nutritional needs.
Right, okay, so it's always best to check with your doctor first if you have any concerns. What about for people who are healthy and they do want to try it? Are there any common mistakes that people make?
Yeah, there are a few. One is not eating enough nutrients during the eating window. You still need to make sure you're getting enough protein, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals.
So it's not just about when you eat, but what you eat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Don't use fasting as an excuse to just eat junk food.
Right, okay, good point.
What else? Another mistake is going too extreme too quickly. Like if you're used to eating all day long, don't suddenly jump into a 20-hour fast.
Okay.
Start slowly, gradually, increase your fasting window as your body adjusts.
So it's that gradual approach again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't forget to drink water. It's easy to get dehydrated when you're fasting.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. Okay, any other words of wisdom before we move on?
Just remember that intermittent fasting is a tool, not a magic bullet. It's about finding what works for you, experimenting, listening to your body.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about the basics, the potential benefits, the downsides. Now I think it's time to dive into like the different ways to actually DO intermittent fasting.
Right.
I mean, we've been talking about these general principles, but are there specific methods or protocols that people can follow?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of different approaches.
Okay, let's talk about some of the most popular ones.
Okay, so one of the most well-known is time-restricted feeding, It's often called the 16-8 method.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. How does that work again?
Basically, you limit your eating to an 8-hour window each day.
Okay.
So, like, you finish dinner by 8 p.m., skip breakfast, and then have your first meal around noon the next day.
So that gives you a 16-hour fasting window.
Exactly. And it's really popular because it's simple and flexible.
Okay, I can see why that's appealing. What about the benefits? Is it effective?
Yeah, research shows it can be really good for weight loss, improving insulin sensitivity, reducing inflammation.
Sounds like a good option to start with.
Yeah, it's a good one to try. Okay, so another method is alternate day fasting.
Ooh, that one sounds more intense.
It is a bit more challenging.
So how does that one work?
Basically, you switch between days of eating and fasting. Some people do a complete fast on fasting days. Others have a very small meal, like 500 calories.
So one day you eat normally, the next day you either fast completely or have a tiny meal.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are the benefits of that one?
It can be really effective for weight loss,
Mhm.
improving insulin resistance, even boosting brain function.
Wow. Okay, but that sounds tough.
It's definitely not for everyone. You need a lot of discipline for that one.
Okay, makes sense. Are there any other methods?
Yeah, there's also periodic fasting, sometimes called the 5-2 diet.
Oh yeah, the 5-2 diet. I've heard of that.
Yeah, that one's popular too. You eat normally for 5 days a week and then restrict calories for 2 non-consecutive days,
Okay.
usually to about 500 or 600 calories on those fasting days.
So it's similar to alternate day fasting, but you get to choose which days you fast.
Exactly. And it has similar benefits like weight loss, better metabolic health, reduced inflammation.
It's amazing how all these different methods can work. It shows how adaptable our bodies are.
It really does. And while they all have their differences, they all share that basic principle of cycling between eating and fasting.
Right. Okay, so many options. Any advice on how to choose the right one?
I'd say just start with something that feels doable for you.
Okay.
Don't try to go too extreme too fast. Experiment, see how you feel, and find what fits into your lifestyle.
I love that. It's a journey. Okay, so now we've got all these different methods. Are there any tools or resources that can help people make intermittent fasting easier? Like especially when they're first starting out?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's actually a lot of great technology out there that can help you track your fasts, monitor your progress, even connect with other people who are doing it.
Okay, like what? What are some of your favorites?
Well, one of the most popular apps is called Zero.
Zero. Okay.
It's free and it lets you set your fasting windows, track how you're doing, and even join challenges.
So it's like having a fasting buddy in your pocket.
Yeah, exactly. That
That's-
community support can be really helpful.
Okay, cool. What else does Zero do?
It also has a bunch of educational content like articles and recipes,
Okay.
and it gives you personalized insights based on your data.
Oh, wow.
And it even connects with other health and fitness apps, so it's pretty comprehensive.
Okay, so Zero's a good one. What about websites? Are there any websites that you recommend?
Yeah, there's a great website called My Circadian Clock.
Like Circadian Clock.
It was created by Dr. Sachin Panda's lab, who we talked about earlier.
Right.
And it has tons of information about circadian rhythms, time-restricted feeding, all that good stuff.
Okay, so that's a good resource for the science behind it all.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. What about any low-tech strategies?
Yeah, sometimes the simplest things are the best. Like just using a journal or a planner just to track your fasting windows, what you eat, how you're feeling. Sometimes writing things down can really help.
Yeah, it makes you more mindful.
Exactly.
Okay, great advice. Anything else before we wrap up this part of the deep dive?
I think the most important thing to remember is that there's no right or wrong way to do intermittent fasting.
Okay.
It's about finding what works for you and your body. So just be patient, experiment, and enjoy the journey.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've talked about the how-tos. I want to circle back to one of the benefits that we touched on earlier, mental clarity. A lot of people say they feel sharper and more focused when they're fasting. Can you talk more about that? What's the connection between fasting and our brains?
Yeah, that's a really interesting area of research.
Okay.
And it seems like fasting can actually shift our brains into a different mode, one that's more alert and focused.
Okay, so tell me more about that. How does that work?
Well, when we fast, our brains release certain neurochemicals, things like norepinephrine and dopamine. And these are associated with alertness, motivation, reward. So they can help us feel more energized and focused, and even more creative.
Oh, wow. So it's like our brain is actually working better when we fast.
In a way, yeah. And this can be really helpful for tasks that require a lot of concentration, like if you're working on a project or studying for an exam.
Yeah, I definitely feel more productive when I haven't eaten in a while.
Right. And there's also evidence that fasting can reduce brain fog and improve overall cognitive function. probably because of the reduced inflammation and the increase in BDNF that we talked about earlier.
Right. Okay, so fasting is good for our brains in so many ways. It's amazing.
It is.
So I know we've been talking a lot about the brain, but what about the gut? We briefly mentioned gut health earlier, but can you talk more about the connection between intermittent fasting and our gut microbiome?
Yeah, absolutely. The gut is often called our second brain, and it plays a huge role in our overall health. And it turns out that fasting can have a big impact on the gut microbiome.
Okay, so tell me more about that. Like, what happens in our gut when we fast?
Well, research shows that fasting can actually make our gut microbiome more diverse,
More diverse. Okay.
and that diversity is really important for a healthy gut.
Okay.
It means that there are lots of different types of good bacteria flourishing in there.
Okay, so it's like a healthy ecosystem.
Exactly.
And that's good for us.
Yeah, it's linked to better digestion, less inflammation, a stronger immune system, even a lower risk of chronic diseases.
Wow. Okay. I'm sold on gut health.
All right.
So how does fasting actually create that diversity?
Well, for one thing, it gives our digestive system a break. You know, when we're constantly eating, our gut is constantly working.
Right.
So fasting allows it to rest and focus on other things like repairing the gut lining and promoting the growth of those beneficial bacteria.
Okay. So it's like a reset for our gut.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And is there anything else that happens?
Yeah, there's also some evidence that fasting can actually reduce the growth of harmful bacteria in the gut.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's really about shifting that balance in favor of the good guys.
Okay. I like that. So taking care of our gut is a really important part of the whole intermittent fasting picture.
Absolutely. A healthy gut is essential for a healthy body and mind.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the science behind intermittent fasting, the different methods, the potential benefits, the things to watch out for. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's such a fascinating topic.
It is. Any final thoughts before we wrap up this deep dive?
I just want to emphasize that intermittent fasting is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding what works for you, experimenting, and being patient with yourself.
I love that.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this episode, what's one question that you want our listeners to think about as they go forward? Like, what's something that they can really take away from this conversation?
I would say, now that you understand the power of intermittent fasting, how can you use it to create a healthier and happier life? You know, what small changes can you make to your eating patterns that will make a big difference in the long run?
That's such a good question. And I hope this deep dive has given everyone the information and the inspiration to start exploring those possibilities. So thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, happy fasting. Wow, we've covered so much ground already. Like, I'm really starting to see intermittent fasting in a whole new light. It's not just about weight loss. It's like this whole body reset button.
Exactly. And it affects so many different systems in the body, including our brains and our gut.
Yeah, and speaking of the gut,
Yeah.
I'm really curious to learn more about that. We talked about gut health briefly before, but can you dive a little deeper into what actually happens in our gut when we fast?
Sure. So the gut is often called our second brain because it's home to trillions of bacteria.
Right, the microbiome.
Exactly. And those bacteria play a huge role in our overall health. And it turns out that intermittent fasting can have a really positive impact on that gut microbiome.
Okay, so tell me more about that. Like, how does fasting affect those good bacteria?
Well, research shows that fasting can actually make our gut microbiome more diverse.
Okay, diverse. And what does that mean exactly?
So diversity in the gut microbiome means there are lots of different types of beneficial bacteria living there.
Okay, and why is that important?
It's linked to all sorts of health benefits, like better digestion, less inflammation, a stronger immune system, even a lower risk of some chronic diseases.
Wow, that's incredible. So by fasting, we're actually creating a healthier environment for all those good bacteria to thrive.
Exactly. And it's not just about increasing diversity. There's also evidence that fasting can actually reduce the growth of some of the harmful bacteria in the gut. So it's really about creating that optimal balance.
Okay, so fasting is like a 2-for-1 deal for our gut. It promotes the good guys and gets rid of the bad guys.
Pretty much.
I'm loving this. It's amazing how something as simple as changing when we eat can have such a profound impact on our gut health.
It is. And remember, a healthy gut is a healthy body.
It's so true. Okay, so we've talked about the gut, we've talked about the brain. I want to circle back to that feeling of mental clarity that people often experience during a fast. Like, what's actually happening in our brains to make us feel more alert and focused.
Well, it seems like fasting can actually shift our brains into a different mode, one that's more tuned in and ready to go.
Okay, so how does that happen? Like, what's the science behind that?
So when we're in a fasted state, our brains release certain neurochemicals,
Okay.
like norepinephrine and dopamine. And these chemicals are associated with alertness, motivation, and reward.
Interesting. So those are the chemicals that make us feel more energized and focused.
Exactly. And they can also boost creativity. And the shift in brain chemistry can be really helpful when we need to concentrate or get things done.
Yeah, and it's funny. I always feel more productive when I haven't eaten in a while. Like my brain just seems to work better.
Right, and there's actually some evidence to back that up. Some studies show that fasting can actually reduce brain fog and improve overall cognitive function.
Wow, so it's not just a feeling. It's actually backed by science.
Yep. And it's likely due to a few things, like the reduction in inflammation, the increase in BDNF, and the shift in brain energy metabolism that we talked about earlier.
It's amazing how everything is connected.
Mhm.
Like fasting benefits our gut, our brain, our whole body, really.
It really is. And the more we learn about it, the more we realize how powerful it can be.
Well, this has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about intermittent fasting and its potential to transform our health and well-being.
It's been a pleasure sharing all this information with you, and hopefully our listeners are feeling inspired to try it out for themselves.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this episode, what's one thing you want our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I would say remember that intermittent fasting is a journey. It's not about perfection or strict rules. It's about experimenting and finding what works best for your unique body and your lifestyle.
I love that. And as always, we encourage everyone to keep learning and keep exploring. There's so much incredible information out there about health and wellness. And we're so glad you're joining us on this journey. So until next time, stay curious and keep those brains and guts happy and healthy.